Your text was very familiar text. As a matter of fact, the part of the text is right there, actually on the front of your program. John chapter 6, beginning, and I want to read these verses 9 and 10. John chapter 6, say John. Chapter 6. And I want to read here in verses 9 and 10 from the New King James Version. John chapter 6, beginning with verse number 9, it says, "There is a lad who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." And there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down in numbers about 5,000. Amen. Verse number 9 says, "There was a lad who had 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" I'd like to put a tag on this text, and I should attempt to teach and preach with this thought in mind. What does it take? What does it take? We live in what I call a doubting Thomas society. It seems as if we have adopted or become accustomed to the doubting Thomas syndrome. You remember doubting Thomas, one of the disciples who says, "Unless I see it for myself, I will not believe." You remember that after Jesus had rose from the cross, had rose from the grave, he had showed himself to the disciples. And when the roll was called, all but 2 disciples was present. We understand that when the roll began to be called, Judas did not answer because, Judas did kill himself or committed suicide after his betrayal of Christ. So it's understanding why Judas was not present when Jesus shows himself to the disciples. But also when the roll was called, Thomas did not answer. Thomas was not present. Thomas was missing in action. Now, on a side note, I don't know about you, but when the Lord shows up, when the roll is called, I want to be present and accounted for. When the Lord shows up, I want to be in a place that when he calls my name, I can answer. So Jesus shows himself to the remaining disciples and have a dialogue with them. And watch this. And when the other disciples find Thomas, they tell Thomas, "Hey, we have seen the Lord." And Thomas's response is simply says, "Okay, that's good, fine, and dandy, but unless I see him for myself, unless I see the nail prints, unless I see the scars, I'm not going to believe it until I see it for myself." And as sad as it is, I believe some of us today, if we're honest with ourselves, have grown accustomed to that doubting Thomas syndrome. I mean, here we are, and I was reminded of this on yesterday, that tomorrow some Americans, some people around the world will be celebrating the 3rd year anniversary of the death of Michael Jackson. Understand this. Now, June 25th of 2009, when Mike passed away, I remember I ran home to watch the news, and there was this little local California station. And I don't know if it was Jermaine or Tito, but was there one of the brothers that was in the house with Michael when he died, was out there talking to the reporter. And he tells the reporter, "Yes, my brother Michael has passed away." And all of the other news stations say that it's been reported, it's alleged that Michael Jackson has passed away. Now here it is, the brother is inside the house, saw firsthand what was going on, but yet the report comes out that it's alleged that he has died. And that's how some of us are. Even when we get it first-hand knowledge, we still choose not to believe. I mean, he was in the house and saw what was going on. He named the characters in the house, and yet they say it's alleged. But watch this now. I have to be fair, because those who don't know, my background is criminal justice, and it's justice who says we are all innocent until proven guilty. So in fairness to Thomas, in his defense, I kind of can sympathize with why he says, unless I see it for myself. Because when you survey the gentlemen, the fellow disciples, you do remember that when Jesus was at the most crucial point of his ministry, while hanging on the cross, crucial point of his ministry. And not only that, if we do a further background investigation into some of the disciples, Peter was a liar and he cussed. You do remember that when they asked Peter, was he with Jesus? He denied him not once, not twice, but 3 times he denied Jesus. And then when the woman says, yes, he was, he turned around and spoke in another tongue to the young lady. So Peter was a liar and he cussed. And then, James and John, the 2 brothers, that they were user of people's self-centered. Because you do remember that they told their mom, hey, mama, when you get close to Jesus, can you tell him? And it says, when you get in your kingdom, can you put my boys, one on your left and one on your right? So they had their own agenda. So now you see why Thomas couldn't believe the disciples. And let's not forget Matthew. The Bible says he was a tax collector. And in those days, tax collectors, when they came, all they told you what the final bill was, but didn't show you that they was putting a little extra away. So I understand why Thomas had the mentality of unless I see it for myself.
Come on.
So understand his response. Because the disciples had some questionable credentials. That their credibility wasn't all that strong, that sturdy. And we too fall into that same category, even though you got someone who was in the room, saw what was going on. Unless they have those strong credentials, you won't believe. I told you about Mike Jackson and his death, and that the brother comes out and talks to the local news station. And it was alleged this, and they believe it to be. But it wasn't, watch this, until CNN confirms it that all of the other stations says, well, CNN has confirmed it. And then we decided to believe what was said, even though we found out an hour before CNN confirms it. So I understand why sometimes in this life that we can't believe everything that we see. That's why we have that mentality, unless I see it for myself, I won't believe. But now watch this. When we come to the book of John, John opens up, and there are 2 theological themes throughout the book of John. One, it talks about who God is. And that he wants you to believe in who he is. And it also talks about having abundant life because of what and who you believe. And when I go through and I begin to look through the book of John, John got some powerful stuff. I promise you, please, by all chance, take your time and read and study John. Now watch this. John opens up by saying, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So already John starts off establishing who he is. And then we go to John chapter 2, and we begin to talk about the signs and the miracles and the wonders of God. And the very first thing Jesus does, is he turns water into wine at the wedding. And understand this, you all know the story, because what it is, they say that when they ran, I like this, when they ran out of water, Jesus' mother didn't go to Jesus and call him out. She just went over to him and said, hey, they run out. And then when Jesus began to pray and touch and bless the water and turn it to wine, the wine taster says, hey, wait a minute, y'all doing something wrong, because y'all are supposed to bring the good stuff out first, but this is better. People saw and started to believe. Then chapter 3 goes on and he tells Nicodemus, unless a man be born again, he shall not, cannot, will not enter the kingdom. Then chapter 4, Jesus encounters a woman at the well and begins to testify to her. And then and the later part of chapter 4, I like this, because he meets a nobleman. A nobleman just simply gets word that Jesus is in the area. And he says, look, my son is sick. He said, now, I got enough faith. Hold on, I'm sorry. He says, I believe that if you just speak the word, my son will be okay. And Jesus speaks the word by simply telling the man, go and return. And as the man is going home, his servant is walking and says, hey, I don't know what's going on, but your son is now well. I'm just trying to show you about the belief and the believing who he is. Watch this. And then chapter 5, one of my favorite verses, when it talks about a man who had been laid by the pool of Bethesda for 38 years. I mean, we hear in Texas, it gets hot. I know most of y'all say, I can't look at this man shut up, because I'm going to hit the pool. You got the bathing suit on. You want to lay poolside. But here this man is poolside for 38 years. And Jesus asks him, hey man, do you want to be made whole? And the man, watch this, because you have to read the text and understand, the man never answered the question. He began arguing and debating with Jesus. And Jesus said, look here, man, you ain't got enough sense to realize I'm trying to hear you. He said, look, just get up and walk and go. I'm just trying to show you how John wants us to believe, and he shows us and he gives us examples for us to believe. Now watch this, and you're going to have to read this because I'm not making this up. But chapter 6 opens up, and it blows my mind. Because it says, it opens up and it says, the great multitude saw and are coming after or following Jesus. The people saw and believed what was going on, and they began to follow Jesus. But watch this, I believe it's around verse 5. Jesus shifts the question, shifts the conversation, turns to his disciples, which means followers of Christ, and asks the question, how much money do we need to feed the people? Don't miss this. Chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5. Jesus shows the people. But then in chapter 6, he shifts the conversation to his disciples and asks the question, how are we going to feed these folks? And watch what happened. Philip begins to analyze and assess the situation and says, hey, look here, Jesus, we ain't got enough money to feed these people. They going to be hungry. Now, keep in mind, this is not the people Jesus is talking to. It's his disciples. I mean, come on now. These are disciples. These are people who were handpicked by Jesus, who had walked with Jesus, talked with Jesus, and now they're questioning who he is.
Come on. Mama.
And then Andrew, he says, all we got is 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. I heard a preacher said all he had was 2 little sardines and some crackers. And then he says, what is that among all of these? So what happens when not the world don't believe? But what happens when the people of God get to a point and a place in their life when they don't believe the man of God after they've seen all that he has done? And my thing is, well, why are we so hard on Thomas? And why was Thomas the disciple singled out and coined with the phrase of doubting Thomas? Of all the disciples. So I started reading and doing some investigation and study, and what I found out, Thomas translates as twin, which means there's two in one. Which means one side wants to believe because of what they have seen and experienced. And you have the other side, regardless of what you see or regardless of what you've experienced, you still won't believe. And Thomas has these two inside of them that are battling. But the reality is, the Bible says a double-minded mind is unstable in all his ways. And you see God time and time again. So the question is, what?
Wow.
What does it take? You've seen God over and over again. Whether it be in your life or the life of your family and friends. I hear somebody say, preacher, you're absolutely right. I have to be honest with myself. But I've had those doubting Thomas moments. Help me to understand, how can I get over having these moments? Now understand, we are human and we will have those moments as long as Grandma would say, the blood is running warm in our veins. We're human and we will always have those moments. But I don't want you to get that bumper sticker mentality because it has no theological principle. You know that bumper sticker that says, God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. No, regardless of what you believe or not, if God says it, that settles it. So help me to understand, what can I do? What should I do when I'm faced with those doubting Thomas moments? I'm going to share with you. I'm going to get on out the way. I can protect on my family. But keep your Bible. The first thing the text is taking to teach us is this. The first thing, when those moments come into your life, into your mind, into your space, the first thing you have to do is you have to surrender all that you got. No matter how great or small it is.
Yes.
You say, preacher, I don't see that in the text. It's right there. I promise you. Verse 9 says that all they had was 2 small fish and 5 barley loaves. But the lad was willing to surrender, give up all that he had. And when you give up what you have, I promise you, no matter how small it is to you, but in the hands of God, it is big. So no matter what you're going through, no matter what may happen to you, when you get to those moments when you don't want to believe, just simply give up all you have. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that is within me. I surrender. That's why the songwriter says, I give my life away, Lord. I'm tired of doing things the way I've been doing it. It's not working, Lord. I give myself away.
Hallelujah.
He gives up all that he has. And even the disciples still questions, is this enough? Will this be enough? But in all fairness to the disciples, because the text said that the multitudes, which means many people, were following Jesus. And I understand when you got a mob of people following you, your mind is not thinking like it should be, and you're confused. So the first thing is you have to surrender all that you have. The second thing is this: you got to settle down. You have to settle down. Where do you get that from, preacher? Easy. Because the first thing is the boy gave up his lunch. The very next thing in verse number 10, what does Jesus say? He said, tell him to sit down. What happens is, because they were up coming after Jesus, it looked to be a chaotic situation. But I don't know about you, but have you ever, like when you sit down, do you know how relaxed you get? When you sit down, the burden that your legs are carrying no longer has to carry the load, and you can enjoy what's going on around you. And he did just say, sit down. He told them to sit in the grass. Do you know that in the valleys there's grass, and shepherds take their sheep through the valley to graze in the grass? Why? Because one, the grass in the valley is easy. Because the first thing is the boy gave up his lunch. The very next thing in verse number 10, what does Jesus say? He said, tell him to sit down. What happens is, because they were up coming after Jesus, it looked to be a chaotic situation. But I don't know about you, but have you ever, like when you sit down, do you know how relaxed you get? When you sit down, the burden that your legs are carrying no longer has to carry the load, and you can enjoy what's going on around you. And he didn't just say sit down. He told them to sit in the grass. Do you know that in the valleys there's grass, and shepherds take their sheep through the valley to graze in the grass? Why? Because one, the grass in the valley is the lowest point of the earth. And in that there is always a stream of water. And also in the valley, while the animals are grazing, they are getting nutrients and proteins and water to encourage them and give them strength for the mountain and the hill they are about to climb. So Jesus said, no, settle them down, sit them down in the grass. Yeah. So when you get into these moments of the doubting Thomas syndrome, the first thing the text says is, hey, first thing is surrender. Give all you got. The second thing the text shows us is you got to settle down. And the third thing the text shows us is you have to separate. Preacher, where you get that from? Because the Bible says that after they sat down, the text goes on to say that Jesus blessed the food, blessed the provision, and then he broke it. And in breaking, there was a separation, which meant the bread wasn't as long as it used to be. So instead of having one piece of bread, he breaks it, and now he has two pieces of bread. And the text said that he kept blessing and breaking and blessing and breaking. And at the end of the story, it said that everybody had enough food. And they had food left over. Sometimes God is saying, when you get to those moments of a doubting Thomas syndrome, sometimes you got to break some relationships. Sometimes you got to break some job situations. Sometimes you got to break some folks off. Sometimes you got to break away from your everyday usual thing. Sometimes in order for God to bless you, he's going to have to break some things from you. God is the only person I know who can multiply by dividing. Jeffrey Allen Johnson, senior pastor of the Eastern Star Baptist Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. He says a few years ago, he said that their young people was having a youth revival, and he says he can't dance. He don't know why he was in there, but because he was the pastor, he thought he had to be in there. And one of the groups that was there had these glow-in-the-light necklaces and things like that. And so he said that some of the young kids came by and said, here you go, Pastor. They just go these little lights. And one of the girls said, Pastor, now they were in the gymnasium. It was dark. The lights was off. And the only lights that was in the dark place was those necklaces. And so he had a couple of necklaces around his neck and said, hey, Pastor, your lights ain't on. And he said, now, I'm in a dark place. Everybody else is shining, and I'm not. And he said, I tried to find the on switch or off. He said, I could not figure out how to get my lights going. So the little girl said, well, Pastor, your lights are not working. And he said, well, baby, look, my mine are broken. You know, something's wrong with my pastor's lights just ain't working. She said, no, Pastor, let me see that thing. So she grabbed the necklace from him. She looked at it, she broke it, and she shook it up and said, Pastor, what you understand, sometimes God has to break you before he can use you. Sometimes God has to break you before your light can shine. This is the light of God. I'm going to let it shine. And so, new heart, I thank you for the 7 years. Understand that what you're going through was all orchestrated and ordained by God. You said, listen, preacher, you ain't been around the 7 years. How do you know that? Let me help you, and I'm going to go ahead and get up out of here. This is your 7-year anniversary. We all know that 7 is the year of spiritual completion. God said where you were, there was only so far you could go. And now I have to move you into a new place to get you to where I want you to go. But not only that, your address is 201 Hill Lane. Now, if I'm not mistaken, is that not the same street number of the old place when you was at?
It is.
Even if not, watch this. 201, let me break this down for you. 201 are derivatives of the number 20 and 1. The number 20 represents redemption in the body of Christ. Number 1 represents unity and new beginning. God says, I'm taking you to a new place, so that you can redeem the world and have a new beginning. But hold on, let me shout you. The name of the street is called Hill Lane. Understand what a hill is. A hill is a slight elevation, because I want the folks in the community around you to see where you are. And the street is called Hill Lane. Understand what a lane is. A lane is a narrow pathway, which means that all the other churches around you may be saying the way is wide, but the street and the road is narrow. And understand this, and I'll be through. You all are in Red Oak, Texas. Red Oak. When you think of Red Oak, you think of a red oak tree.
All right.
Let me just share some characteristics of a red oak tree. A red oak tree grows strong and tall. They say it is conducive to bad soil and bad situations, which means that even